All right, guys. So the next step of our cupping is where we're going to get to evaluate the wet aroma. All right. And so what I'm going to do is just pour a little bit of water on here. If you're ever interested in cupping at home, we use 12 grams of coffee.
Okay.
Coffee.
Yeah.
12 grams of whatever you feel like. And we're just going to let that steep for a while. And one of the interesting things about cupping is you do not filter the coffee. So it's kind of like a French press would be.
Yeah.
You're going clockwise. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, Northern Hemisphere.
Wait, for real?
No.
Okay.
Well, as we're gonna allow this to go, you're gonna sniff. I strongly advise against picking up the cup at this stage. It's gonna get quite a bit messier.
Okay.
But just gonna get your nose. Nice
Again, you did it on mine.
I know.
You could have, but that's okay.
Oh, there's too many competing.
There's gonna be a lot.
smells.
Yeah, it's okay. That's why you got to get your nose nice and close.
He's like a hound. Man, this rainforest, Erik.
You went.
It's
to the
getting a
rainforest.
lot of rain.
In the first cup, I
A
got
lot of
a
rain.
little bit of chocolate, and then you distracted me. There was spice, some.
The fruitiness is gone, unfortunately.
Oh, there's a little. Gosh, it's almost cinnamon.
Yeah.
Chocolate and cinnamon in that first cup.
Yes, you guys have a job here. And then some
is
interesting
good.
fun
Yeah.
facts about coffee.
Oh, and there's the cotton candy right there.
The cotton candy one, the Costa
Oh,
Rica
I just
is,
tasted it on the tip of my tongue.
Yes.
Mm.
It's a natural process
He doesn't
coffee.
even
So
need
the
a
difference
coffee.
is
He's
here.
good. Erik, how would you say the church has historically understood the Great Commission? And then, even more importantly, what does it mean for us today? What does it look like today to live out the Great Commission?
Oh yeah, man, that's a great question. I really appreciate it because I think that historically the church has not really understood the Great Commission throughout the ages. It's more misunderstood the Great Commission, and so I think the earlier church actually did a pretty good job. They reproduced very rapidly. But, and really, maybe even for the first 1,000 years, they're hanging on to this idea of reproducing disciples.
Yeah.
But then, then it gets a little bit off base after that, and it goes a lot of different directions. And look at kind of where we are denominationally today. I mean, clearly there's a huge amount of various ideas about how the Great Commission should be lived out. And I really appreciate that there's a guy by the name of, I think his name is Brian Sanders, who came up with this concept that's really helped me kind of take this forward. He calls it his ecclesial minimum. What's the church? That's kind of a big word. It means what pertaining to the church, what is the essence of the church?
Yeah.
And there's kind of 3 domains inside of that. And there's this idea that through worship, we learn to love God. We learn to obey God. We learn to yield and be changed internally. We have to be spiritually formed, which means we have to be aware of what we don't know and who we are and our blind spots and a whole bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. So we're formed spiritually on the inside.
Yeah.
And that's under this kind of domain of worship. And then we also have to be formed externally. We have to act out our faith. We have to do something with it. What do we do? What's happening? Well, part of that is this public conversation that, I have a faith, and this is what I believe about the world. And there's this relational development that has to take place where I'm going to people and I'm earning the right to share my faith. And it's not even a right. I'm earning the opportunity to share my faith.
I love that. Love that.
And then together we discern how to move that conversation forward. We discern if you're interested in really what you're aiming at is this idea that, if you've articulated what it is that Jesus is and the hope that's found within him, if you've done that well, then they're gonna ask to be invited in. Mm-hmm. they're gonna ask what the gospel is, and then you walk together relationally, and that's what I would call mission, and that's what I would say how the Great Commission gets lived out. But before we finish talking about that gets connected to that third domain, which is community. This idea that there's something to do with other people in the church. And the church gets together, they meet together, and they do all kinds of things. They learn the Bible, they worship together, they do the ordinances, or fancy terms for the Lord's Supper and baptisms, right? And they confess their sins to each other. The community speaks into if I'm hearing and seeing and doing right, if I'm behaving rightly in the world. Because if I don't have that, man, I go off on rails and I start a cult. And so when those three domains are kind of overlapped and interlocked, that's actually the essence of the church.
Yeah.
All right, well, so mission has to be integral to that. It's part of this minimum, which means I have a role to play in God's kingdom. How do I do that? Oh, it's my job, just like your job, is to go and make disciples. Oh, it's to actually share my life and the message of Christ with people that are in my spheres of influence.
I love that. Man, so as you kind of think about the Great Commission, and we're talking about disciple making, what would you say has been an issue, at least in our setting, at least in America, when it comes to gospel sharing? Like I gave you this pitch on who Jesus is and what he did.
Yeah.
And then now respond versus making a disciple, making someone who responds but also follows Jesus in that way.
Gosh, that's a great question. There's a lot packed into it, because I do think that for a long time, we lived in a society that gave kind of the points of the gospel. Like it was peppered throughout government, it was peppered throughout school and education, and things were there. And so I don't exactly know the time frame, so don't quote me on this, but I'd guess that somewhere starting around the 1940s up through even our present time, we started treating our gospel and our evangelism training kind of like selling a ticket to heaven. Now, nobody did that on purpose. No, that wasn't like, intentionally framed or done. But I do think the message we gave was, it's our job to go out and share the gospel. It's God's job to move people. And so you just drop that bomb on somebody and let it explode or have its way with them. And then you're out. You've done your job and get your ticket to heaven. And then some people agreed with that. Some people came into the kingdom. But then they didn't do anything. Nothing happened. Their lives didn't change. They weren't radically reborn as new creations. And so I think the problem is that the gospel isn't something that we sell. The gospel is actually good news that can change your life. And it is news. I mean, think about any kind of news. News tells you what happened in the past so that you can make a change today and have a preferred future. Any news does that. Well, the gospel does that too. What happened in the past? Oh, there's this person called Jesus Christ that died and rose from the grave. And he said, if you'll follow me, you'll have life and you'll have it to the full. Oh, so now I've heard that news and I have to make a decision about that. I have to understand it enough to go, does that impact me? And the gospel does impact me, because if I grasp that, then Jesus comes into my life, my inner life gets formed, my behaviors change, and then my whole future changes. And that's what good news does for you. And that's a process. It's not just a bomb. It's not a message bomb. It's not a selling of a ticket to heaven. It's a process. It's a journey, and it's nested inside the process of discipleship, which is, there's got to be a gospel message. It's got to be received, understood, integrated. And then I have to begin to conform, to yield my life to what Jesus and the Holy Spirit want to do with me. And I need good people that are walking with me to help as a guardrail, to keep me on the path and help prevent me from becoming this crazy cult leader.
Yeah, I love that. Because I think of Jesus' words, teaching them all I've said, and helping them to obey, right? Like to actually be shaped to do these things. And so for a while, even in my own life, personal evangelism or fulfilling the Great Commission in Fredo's life looked like what you just described, selling a ticket, like giving a sales pitch, awaiting the decision, either being excited because they prayed to receive Jesus, which happens, or being deflated because they just seem to walk away, which I remember happening in New Zealand of all places. I spent all day with a guy and I thought I gave the best gospel presentation ever. I'd been a Christian for like 2 months, so it was terrible. But he, at the end of it, was like, I'm good. I was like, well, that's it? And he just was like, nah. And he walked away. And I had such a narrow perspective as to what fulfilling the Great Commission looks like. And I think when I think about my life today, I think first, well, I want to be a disciple. If I'm going to make disciples, I need to be first a disciple myself of Jesus. spend time with him, receive his promise that he's with me wherever I go, that he is Lord. All authority under heaven and earth has been given to him. So that means all authority Jesus owns. And so every decision I make every day, it's under Jesus as my Lord, right? And as the Savior of the world. And so I want to make decisions, live a life that reflects he's Lord, and then invite other people into that process too. You talked about life and having it to the full, and embracing the life that Jesus invites us into is one in which he calls us to change our ways, to find ourselves in him, to lose our life so that we might find it, and actually discover that saying no to myself and yes to him is actually far more freeing than we can possibly imagine.